Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Dru Johnson, and I wrote this little book called Understanding Biblical Law. What's it called? Skills for Thinking with and Through the Torah. Skills for Thinking with and Through Torah by Baker Academic. I'm a little sick. That's why my voice is a little bit lower. But I just wanted to talk about why I wrote this book and what it is. There's a line in the third verse of "O Holy Night." It's coming up on Christmas time. And the line says, "His law is love and his gospel peace." And that stuck out to me. I thought, oh, wow. Okay, whoever wrote that song, at least when they got around to it in the third verse, they thought it's worth mentioning that God's law is love. And I just don't think that's how most people think of it. And that's part of the nut that I was trying to crack in this book. Secondly, Psalm 1, the book of the Psalms, opens with Psalm 1 that says, a happy man, unfortunately translated a blessed man, but it's a happy man, maybe even a flourishing man, some of my colleagues would say, is one who avoids scoundrels, as it were, and meditates, he mutters and chews on the Torah, the law, night and day. That's where his delight is. So again, it depicts a happy man, a prosperous man, a flourishing man, as somebody who's chewing on the biblical law, which I think strikes us as odd. We think, what would that look like? Especially since most people in Iron Age Israel didn't have access to the Torah. It's not like they could read it for themselves and have their own scroll at home. And then third, you say, well, maybe we're in the New Testament period, so the new has come, the old is gone. We don't need that law anymore. But then Jesus is always and strikingly saying he's come to intensify the law, to turn it up to 11, the volume of the law in our lives. He even says at the beginning of his Sermon on the Mount, before he begins recontextualizing the Torah for his present audience, he says, "Do not think that I've come to abandon the law. I've actually come to bring it to fullness." And so there's this kind of escalation of the law in Jesus' thinking. And you may be thinking, well, when I read Jesus, I don't see somebody who loves the law and who thinks of the law as love. Well, and I get that. And I think that signals the problem, is that we don't think of the biblical law that way. In fact, when I say something like we need to bring biblical justice to the situation, I think most of us think of something negative, punitive, penalizing, harsh, fundamentally bad being brought to the situation. But after spending a lot of time in the law, after chewing on it day and night for years and years and years, I think I get it. I understand why his law is love and why a happy man chews on that law day and night and it causes him to prosper, why it acts as kind of wisdom. I think the perceived problem is this, is that you say, okay, the Psalm says we should meditate on the law. Jesus says he's bringing the law to fullness. So as a good Christian, maybe I should go look at the law as well. And then we open up to the law, in Exodus 20, 21, 22, open up to Leviticus, parts of Numbers, or most of the middle of Deuteronomy, and we think the law is boring. We think that it's confusing, certainly very confusing. We often think that it's racist or that it's sexist, that it mistreats people, which are all fair things if we think that this is the problem, right? If we're bringing ourselves to the text. They're not fair things when it comes to the actual biblical law, though, because that's the perceived problem, is that the biblical law is boring, complex, confusing, racist, sexist, etc. But the real problem is this, and this is what I attempt to address in this book, is that we are bringing the wrong ideas to the law. We're reading it wrong. That's why it's called Skills for Thinking with and Through Torah. We're bringing modern legal ideas that cloud our vision, that don't allow us to see what the law itself is doing. And so in this book, what I'm trying to do is help us understand simple things that will really help us open the law to us and help us understand what it's doing and all of its various features. One thing that gets us at the very beginning is, if you're an American or a Western person in a liberal democracy, we think of laws as rules that you either break or you keep, right? And it's just that simple. You either go the speed limit or you don't go the speed limit. You either stop at the stop sign or you don't stop. You either keep your hands to yourself or you're killing somebody, right? Obviously, it gets more complex. That's why we have courts. That's why we have case law. Law is always complicated, which is why lawyers will always stay in business. But what if I were to tell you something that almost everybody who works in the biblical law thinks is true, and that is, the biblical law is not full of rules that you either break or keep. That's not what it's doing. That's a different concept of law that actually emerges in the Greek period and then gets solidified in the Roman period, right about the time a little bit before Jesus comes on the scene. This is a new view of law, which is why Jesus has to reset people and recontextualize this view of law that he is developing, both affirming some of the things that they got right about the law and then denying many of the things that they have misunderstood because they're bringing the wrong idea of law to the law. If we think of law more as guidance, even keeping the law, maybe you remember, it says all over in the Torah, you must keep this law, you must keep these statutes, you must keep these things, right? But it doesn't mean break or keep like a light switch. It's either on or off. Actually, the word keep there, shamar, in the Hebrew, means to tend, like a garden. The man and the woman are to keep the garden. It's keeping sheep, like Abel in the next story, or not like Cain, who says, what am I, my brother's keeper? It's this idea of tending and cultivating the justice and righteousness that God wants to proliferate in the earth through this line of people called Israel, and now the Israel of God, which includes us Gentiles as well, if you're a Gentile like me. And so what is biblical law if it's not all of these other things? Biblical law is, at the very least, it's God's love for creation and humanity. It's not just about humans. It's also about how we treat animals. It's also about how we treat plants and trees and all kinds of things. So it's God's love towards creation through us humans. And it's certainly about protecting and guiding us. So it protects the most vulnerable. And vulnerability doesn't mean that you're poor and downtrodden, although that would also be vulnerable. Wealthy people can fall into vulnerable situations and need to be protected according to the biblical law as well. And the biblical law guides us almost like wisdom literature. It's guiding us on how to think about all these different situations that arise in the world. Finally, I would say biblical law restrains us from doing evil and retrains us towards God's view of justice, which it's incredible. The biblical law does something that no other law in the ancient Near East does. It says you have to love God and you have to love your neighbor. And Leviticus 19, you have to love the foreigner who's with you as well. So it's doing lots of work that we don't think of as law and legal work today. Nowhere in the U.S. Code or any state law does it say you have to love God or love your neighbor. But there's a lot of positive, pro-social, as we might say, law in God's law that shows his love for his creation that he called very good, and his love for all humans through his people Israel, and now through his people, the Israel of God. That includes me and maybe you if you're a Gentile. So that's basically what I'm doing in this book. It's written for lay people. It could be used in a high school class, an undergraduate class, but also even a seminary. It's basically meant to really help people to stop making basic mistakes when they're reading the law and to help them understand what is going on with the law and give them a new imagination for what's going on. And then you see all kinds of incredible things opening up. And then all of a sudden, Jesus's and Paul's teaching on the law opens up and you see new things that you've never seen before. It's exciting. I forgot to mention one thing that I'm probably most excited about with this book is, in order to help illustrate the points, Baker Academic let me write a fictional story. There's 7 episodes of one story where a young woman finds a dead body while walking between 2 villages in ancient Israel. And I tell a story about how those villages may have, it's all speculation, but how they may have used the Torah and the stories in the Torah, not just the laws themselves, but the stories themselves of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Joseph, and Moses, etc., how they used those stories and the law and the poetry and the rituals in order to figure out what they should do about this dead guy. Was it a murder? Who should be held accountable? What should they do if it was a murder? What should they do if there's blood libel on somebody's hands? And so we watch that unfold over 7 episodes, and every episode corresponds to the chapters about the things you just learned. So that's something I'm excited about. Friends have told me that it works. So if you're interested in all that I just said, it piqued your interest, then, pick it up. It's not that expensive. If not, you can just click on, I'm sure you already have clicked to another video by this time. So I'm not even talking to you at this point. All right, that's it.